Streaming now.
Oh,
Just started.
All right,
We are now.
great.
Actually,
Thank you.
sorry, give me 1 second. I want to make sure it's in board docs.
okay.
Apologies.
So I was gonna
We're
ask
still streaming.
quickly, our new CFO, I thought this is her start month. Is she not, did I misinterpret?
December, first week.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm
Soon,
one
but
month off. One month
yeah,
off. Okay.
but still doing, there's work that's happening behind the scenes, and
Okay. All right.
Deputy
So,
Foster has been doing some work with her, getting her caught up in
sure.
long onboarding, if you will.
Oh, this is definitely got to be a lengthy onboarding. There's almost the whole season, I think, will be onboarding for someone in this capacity.
Okay, we are officially in board docs, the link, and can get started.
Thanks, Christina. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the November 11th, 2024 Hartford Board of Education Finance Committee meeting. We're glad you chose to join us today. Thank you to my board members who are here, fellow board members that are here, and to the staff that's here to present to us. I will go ahead and kick it off to Chief Paul Foster to go ahead and take us away.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Good to be with you. Can you hear me okay? Great. So the first thing we're going to talk about, we have sort of two things on the agenda, but the first thing we're going to do is just our regular monthly financials report. And so, Christina, are you going to put that up on the screen? Oh, there it is, as if by magic. And so this is really, think of this as our first quarter financial report. So this is period 3, so through the end of September. So that's through the first 3 months of the year, keeping in mind that our first 2 months of the year, being July and August, are low spending months for us because our 10-month employees are not working, and obviously school is not in session for most of our schools during the months of July, or most of July and August. Okay, so where we are as of September 30th, our spending, I'll give you the headlines. Our spending and encumbrances are a bit higher at this point in the year this year as compared to last year. That's actually a good news thing in the sense that that's mostly a result of the timing of payments for transportation and utilities, as well as our timeliness of our encumbrances for, again, transportation, utilities, tuition, instructional improvements. So we are, trying to be as proactive as possible, both in getting our purchase orders entered, getting funding encumbered for those expenses, and then also spending it. And so, we've been processing payments for transportation, for utilities. So that's why you see it quickly, which is why you see the expenses year to date compared to last year being a little bit higher. The other thing I'll give you as a headline here is we are obviously continuing to pay attention to an FY25 potential deficit and already contemplating what are the strategies we can take to attempt to mitigate that deficit. I think we talked in our last meeting of Finance Committee about this, but there are two, really three current drivers of the potential deficit for FY25. Two of them are related to changes in assumptions, essentially. And so we had hoped that we would have enough ESSER funding remaining after the end of fiscal 24 to cover about $5 million of expenses in FY25. So that was built into the FY25 budget as an assumption. But as it turns out, as we were balancing FY24, we ended up exhausting all of our ESSER funding as of June 30th. And so that $5 million assumption hasn't borne out. And similarly, we had hoped to use all of the non-lapsing reserve fund that's held by the city in FY25. But again, we needed about $5 million of that to balance FY24. The primary driver of needing the funding in FY24 to achieve balance was tuition. Again, mostly special education tuition coming in higher than we had budgeted for the FY24 fiscal year. The other variable that has shown up in our FY25 budget forecasting is utilities. So we adopted the budget. The city has a contract with a vendor that does utility projections, and we got a utility projection that we built into our budget. Our budget was adopted. Subsequently, the company issued a revised projection both for us and the city, and Can you hear me okay? Okay. Um, so that revised projection that came from the city's vendor increased our expected utility costs by $2.5 million. And again, that revised projection came to us post adoption of the budget. And so that's something we now have to track as a potential risk factor for the budget. So those three things are contributing to a deficit. In terms of strategies to mitigate, you all know this well, our vacancy numbers are running higher. We had built a 5% vacancy assumption into the budget, meaning we had assumed we would have savings on the salary and fringe line items amounting to vacant, 5% of our positions being vacant. Our vacancy rate is higher than that, closer to 10% at this point. And so that does mean we're accruing savings beyond what we had assumed. So that's one. Obviously, financials is the only way that's a good thing. Obviously, we want to fill those positions and are doing everything we can to fill those positions. But at the moment, that's allowing us to build up some reserve. The other thing we've already communicated to schools and departments is we will be watching closely for spend down. And for example, when we get into December, we'll take a look at accounts that are significantly below 50% spent, even though we'll be approaching halfway through the year. And we'll be doing some budget sweeps from non-salary accounts. Now, keep in mind, how much we can realize from sweeping non-salary accounts is a little bit limited because salaries and fringe amount to 85% of our budget. So there's only so much you can do by sweeping non-salary accounts. So that's really where we are as of the end of September. So I want to make sure you're aware of where we are in terms of the potential for a deficit in FY25, what we're doing to mitigate it. So attached to the memo, you do have our all funds report. You also have our general fund report and the special funds. We did make add two additional columns to the special funds that the Finance Committee Chair, Board Chair Hockenhall had requested on the special funds to be able to see the revenue so that we can monitor revenue as it comes in. And so if you go, Christine, if you go to the special funds report, one more. So the rightmost columns are added to this report new this month. And so you'll see year-to-date revenue and revenue not yet received. And so obviously we build a budget based on our expected revenue. And then we pay attention to how much has come in against how much we need to cover that budget. Obviously, you see a lot of zeros in year-to-date revenue because almost all federal and state grants are reimbursement based. So we have to spend it. It has to be fully expended. The check's got to be cut. Then we submit for reimbursement. And if you go to the last page, the one we actually highlighted in blue, some that we pay close attention to because they're variable, more so than the grants. Where most of our grants, we kind of know what we're going to get. But if you look at Medicaid billing, third-party insurance billing, and tuition billing, we want to pay attention to how much revenue is coming in versus how many expenses we budgeted against that anticipated revenue. And so we've added those two columns just to make sure you have visibility into that part of the work. And I will pause there, see if there are questions.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to do this.
Mr. Walker, go for it. You have questions?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. So, Deputy Fawcett, the first question is just with the all funds. We're quarter of the way through, and we're like not close to spending a quarter of the money, and so, or it doesn't look that way unless I too am not understanding. Yeah, walk me through that, because I was going to ask you clearly expenditures are expenditures, right? Are the encumbrances additional spending that's on, what am I trying to say, on deck, but not actually spent at this moment? So help me understand that just make sure I'm kind of reading that the right way.
Absolutely. So we're at about, if you look at expenditures and encumbrances, we're about 23% on the all funds. So Christine, if you can scroll down to the total at the bottom. Right. So we've spent 52.8 million of the $429 million budget. We have encumbered 46 million of the budget in addition to the 52.
So, okay.
But I can speak to the
down.
encumbrances. The encumbrances, just to say, so the expended column, that means the check has been cut. So that includes
Correct.
things like payroll has been processed for whatever week's payroll has been processed. It's also inclusive of, services to vendors where we've paid them. The encumbrance means there's a PO out, a purchase order out there that has committed us to make a payment to somebody, but we haven't received the bill or we haven't paid the bill yet.
And that's kind of where I was getting at. So that 46 million was recognized in the first quarter. You just haven't cut a check for it yet. So
Yes, that's right.
right, not as far off. Um, I was going to ask because I don't remember if we had it before last year. Are you able to provide kind of a spending profile of what we anticipate for the year? Because you said the spending is going to go up. Like if I'm reviewing it with you, part of what I'd be reviewing is seeing how we're doing against what we anticipated was going to be kind of our spend profile. And so you've mentioned it's going to go up a lot. Maybe for the next quarter, we can get a spend profile so we can see anticipated versus maybe what actually ends up happening in that month or quarter.
Yeah, we can certainly do that based on historical, right? And part of why the expenditures, the 52 million is, to your point, less than a quarter is because of the July, August, right? We don't spend as much in July, August. And so the first quarter is our lightest quarter relative to spending. But we could probably we could provide you with some kind of, what percentage would we be expect to be at each month in the year.
And yeah, that's why I figured you'd say that, but it's important because looking at the budget right now, it looks like, wow, it would be great for the year. Because you mentioned two comments in there. If I get a second question quickly in here, or third question, you've mentioned that you've got to kind of mitigate $11 million, but it looks like we're already recognizing some savings. So that's why I was thinking there must be some anticipated spending that I'm not seeing there, that you're already noticing the $11 million we have to mitigate, out the general fund, I guess, by the end of the year. I think that's what I was reading in your report.
Yeah, it's early yet, so we haven't done a full payroll projection. I think once we do a full payroll projection, then we're going to know how much additional savings we've realized thus far on
Oh, okay.
payroll.
So it may actually be okay, but
Well, yeah, I think it's unlikely we're going to have 11 million in additional payroll savings. So I mean, I do think there's some work we're going to have to do to close some gaps.
okay. All right, I'll stop there.
Mr. Mills?
Yeah, sorry I keep looking at my phone. That's what I pulled the agenda up on. So it's not that I'm just not paying attention, just so we're all aware. The amount of money that we have to send to schools, like the open choice program, all of that is finalized in October-ish, right? Like the amount of money we either send or get via, like I thought there was like a cutoff for students we send out of district or vice versa, students that we receive in district.
Yes.
My understanding has always been that there's like a October deadline for when we either lose that money or have to send it back to the district. Is that ringing any bells?
Yeah, that's correct. So enrollment cuts off for magnet and for choice October 1. But the thing to keep in mind is from a budgetary standpoint, that only gives us certainty around general fund tuition, which is about a quarter of our tuition bill.
Yes. So, okay. So I guess my question is, when we are projecting that funding at the beginning of the year, like, do we have an actual versus whatever we budgeted for that?
Like, do we have an actual from the previous year that we use, you mean?
No. So I guess for this year, right? You said there's that October 1st cutoff date.
Oh, I got you. Do we have an actual as of right now in terms of what the general fund? I don't have it tonight, but that's something we could certainly get you.
Okay, cool. And then the ECS funding, right? Like, how does that? I know that the state budgets it in like February or April, and then we don't actually ever figure it out until like mid-summer after they've finalized their session. Have we received that funding yet?
Yes. So I believe the city, I mean, the ECS funding goes to the city, right?
Right.
So to be totally honest, I'd have to go back and look and see. I mean, I believe we get it in multiple installment payments, so we don't have all of it, obviously, but we get parts of it. And I will say our ECS actually, in spite of enrollment, is stable because there's legislation that even if our enrollment declines, the state can't reduce the ECS outlays.
Right. So we get that and again, I'm familiar with when we get it from the city side, less so as to how the board gets it. Like, do we also get it quarterly? Is it like a lump sum at the end of the year? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, it's a little, to be totally honest, it's a little gray because the reality is we don't actually manage any of our own cash,
Right.
right? So, I mean, we just put our budget in Munis that says we have this amount of money in ECS. And really the city is managing all of our cash flow. So there's no, I mean, the city is, they're doing the
Right.
intergovernmental transfer to put the money in our fund. So I could find out for you. I don't actually know when
I
they're
mean,
doing
quite
those
frankly, if that's how
transfers.
that works, I could probably find out easier in the treasurer's office at work tomorrow. So I guess I will relay that person to the people who literally do cash flow.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Thank you for that.
Yep.
Can I add that there might be a circumstance in which a payment is delayed depending on, this has happened in the past, depending on the process or the process relative to residency verifications, as an example in the past, where, right, the state has withheld funds because Hartford Public Schools and CREC, for example, hadn't worked out the residency verifications. And so it's kind of been held in the past. So that might impact Mr. Mills if you ever kind of look and you say, oh, there's an anomaly on this during this year. That is a reason why.
I will say,
Gotcha. Thanks for that.
I'll just add on that point, Superintendent. I don't had a chance to tell you this. We've been working more closely with CREC. And so we had a meeting last week and we agreed, well, I'm knocking on wood when I say this to you. We agree that they're not going to request a withholding from the state because we've been working much more closely on kind of making sure we're on the same page about students who are and are not residents. And so as of now, we have a commitment they're not going to try to withhold the ECS funding.
And I know that there was a question, I'm trying to remember where the request, I'm not sure if it was board or Blue Ribbon Commission member that asked to get a historical on that, by the way, relative to how much money are we talking about with regard to the residency verifications and how much Hartford Public Schools has. They use the word waived. And there has been times in which for us in Hartford Public Schools, it's not that we waived, but when the state says to you, we're going to withhold money, right, it puts us in a very unique situation. So just actually informing the board here that was a request, and so we will share that with you, board, before sharing it out.
Thanks. I do have one quick question. And Paul, I just want to thank you for taking time to walk through these financial statements with me last week. It was very, very helpful. So I do appreciate that. My one question, and we don't need an answer today, but I would like to maybe talk about it in the future, is if you have any concerns with the new administration that will be coming into place at the federal level, if there is any concerns about any federal funding that we have budgeted for that might be not coming through this year and or in the future.
I have many concerns, funding and non-funding. But that aside, it's so early. I think it's hard to know. I mean, obviously what everybody has heard is talk of, dissolving the Federal Department of Education. But my understanding is even in those scenarios, the talk has been taking the federal education funding and then block granting it to states without the same level of oversight. So it's just really hard. Like if that were the case, then in theory, things like our title funding, we could still come, right? But then obviously there's also lots of talk about drastically cutting the federal budget. And so there certainly has been a push in recent years on some parts to reduce title funding to schools. And so it's just so early. But I mean, we certainly need to be paying attention to that and talking to our delegation in Washington about what that would mean for us.
Thank you. And I wasn't sure if when, I don't know, back in, was it 2016, if we saw anything similar to this. I just wasn't sure if any funding got immediately cut or anything like that. But again, not anything we have to talk about today, but definitely something.
Yeah, there wasn't, I mean, during the previous administration of the incoming president. And I was not at Hartford at the time, but I was in another school district, and there was lots of talk, but there was also a more split Congress. And so we didn't lose anything at that time. I think there's a greater risk this time around.
Understood. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I will also remind us all that, like, right, with any new administration, there will be a lot of lobbying that takes place. And so to Deputy Foster's point around our active advocacy, starting early. What I have heard is that there was conversation that funding used through the Department of Education can go through different channels. And so that ultimately it might end up serving school children anyway, but that it might go through other departments, if that makes sense.
Understood. Thank you. Mr. Walker.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. Given this discussion, can we reach out to our Washington delegation to ask them to kind of come and chat with us, maybe workshop us when it's appropriate? It is rather early now, but I know I believe they may have more clarity, let's say by sometime next year or whatever, and this feels like a topic people will still be interested in. So I just wanted to offer up to add to our action item to ask them to maybe workshop us on this particular topic on one of their trips back to Hartford. And I'm open to work on their schedule in terms of setting that meeting up, but that's it.
Is any other questions on this quarter's financial statements? Okay. Deputy Foster, I think you have the next item too.
Yes, and so we are going to, this I think has been a request from the board, and Chair Hockenhall and I talked last week, to really spend some time in Finance Committee trying to go a little deeper into the budget as a prelude to actually, we're going to be heading into the FY26 budget very shortly, and just trying to give you a little more, go deeper into different aspects of the budget. And so for tonight, what I've prepared is essentially a deep dive into central office. And I'll be transparent and say, certainly I'm sure there will be follow-up questions. As I was doing this, I was thinking, what is the right level of detail for you as the board, right? So I'm not giving you a line item budget with all 9,000 line items. But what I'm trying to do is give you a picture of both the staffing and the core non-staff expenditures across each of the departments that live in the central office part of our budget. And so it's a long slide deck. And so I'm not going to speak to every particular data point on every slide, but essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to move through every central office department. And certainly you have the slides, or I don't think you will have the slides so that you can look at these and certainly ask follow-up questions of me after the meeting as well as during the meeting. And Chair Hockenhall, do you want me to try to go through the whole thing and do questions at the end? There is a lot here, so I don't know how you'd like me to approach that.
Do you want to just stop periodically when you feel it's a good breaking point for some questions?
Sure.
I think that would
I
be
do
good.
have it broken up into 3 chunks. I guess I'll stop after each of the 3.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. So Christina, we can go ahead. And so these are all of the departments, and this is the way I've got this broken up, the 3 chunks. It's how we broke it up in the FY25 budget document. So if you look at our budget book, and if you look at our PowerPoint, there was an overview of the FY25 budget. We really split central office into 3 buckets, or what we call, I put it in air quotes a little bit when we call it central office, because many of these departments, right, they live in what we call the central office part of the budget because they're not in an individual school's budget. But there's some of these departments, the staff in them spend all of their time in schools, either serving students or serving staff. And so we tried to break it up in the FY25 budget. So I'm following that same breakdown. So I'm going to walk through each of these sort of direct service to schools, support to schools, and then what you really think of as, true central office, right? The administration is the sort of 3rd bucket. So we can go ahead. And what I've done is I have 2 slides for each department. And let me just talk about the data real quick. So I always have to give you my caveats. The organization charts. So this includes the organization charts for every department, this slide deck. Those organization charts are what was reflected in the FY25 budget. So these org charts are also, they're the same as the ones that are in the back of the FY25 budget book. There have been some changes in reporting structures. And so there's some places in here where you're going to see footnotes, and that's just me trying to be as clear as I can be where there's been shifts since the budget was adopted. Again, the FTE count also reflects the adopted budget. It's budgeted positions. So there are positions that you'll see in here that are budgeted but are vacant. And then there's some nuances in the comparisons to previous year FTE counts that I'll talk about when I get to those particular departments. And yeah, that's the end of my caveat. So why don't we dive into the data? Okay, so direct service to schools. Again, these are departments that, as we framed in the FY25 budget, departments that are where the staff are pretty much in schools all of the time, providing direct service in schools. And we'll move through these ones pretty quickly. There's only a few. So if we go to athletics, which is the first one, and this will give you an orientation to what I have. Oh, sorry. For each section, I included this slide at the start, which is just, this is pulled directly from the FY25 budget PowerPoint. So if you were to go back and look, this is pulled straight from that. And so we shared that, and I'm just sharing this to set the context, right? So we had shared the FTE comparisons by department when we adopted the FY25 budget. So if we go to the next slide, then we'll get into athletics. Okay, so on all of these slides, what you're going to see is you're going to see the 15-16 adopted budget FTE count, the 19-20. The reason for those, I mean, 19-20, the particular reason for 19-20 is the last budget that was adopted previous to the pandemic. And that's why we use 19-20 as a comparison in the budget book as well. You're going to see 23-24 inclusive of ESSER. So that's where you're going to see some increases, right? Where we added positions with the benefit of ESSER funding. And then you're going to see 24-25. You're going to see the org chart on the right. And so athletics obviously is a small department. I do have footnotes here. So that's because we didn't have an athletic department in the Hartford Public Schools. That was a new addition. Essentially, schools manage their athletics on their own, which is in no way a best practice in terms of scheduling and all of the things that go into running a robust athletics program. And then particularly over the last few years, as you know, we've dramatically expanded middle school sports. And so that's why you see it going from 0 FTEs to 1 and 3. And I want to say that the assistant athletic director, which was added for 24-25, is 75% funded through the magnet grant for athletic expansion at the middle school level. I'm not, sorry, not at middle school, the middle and high school level in our magnet schools. And what I'll say is we have athletic directors school-based at our high schools. We do not at our middle schools. So our middle school sports are entirely managed through this 3-person department. So they do all the work that you'd think an athletic director does for middle school sports, scheduling games, booking referees, scheduling transportation. So that's the athletics organization. If we go to the next slide, and you're going to see, and like I said, there's going to be 2 slides for every department. And what each slide does is it talks about what are the positions. And you see that on the left with a little synopsis of what are the duties and summaries of those positions. On the right, you're going to see key non-staff. So this, again, this is not a line item budget. This is not every line item in the athletics budget, but it's trying to give you a sense of what are the larger non-staff expenditures. And so the biggest one in athletics is, like I said, middle school sports are not budgeted at the school level. So the entire budget for middle school sports lives in the athletic department. Okay, so I'm going to try to move quickly again through these because I don't want to, we'll be here all night if I try to give the same level of time to all of them. So health services and clinics. And so what you can see here is health service FTEs, clinic FTEs, but what on the right, the org chart is really the health services department that actually, the folks actually sit in central office. The vast majority of the health service staff are the practitioners who are in our clinics or in our schools. So if we go to the next slide, you can see that. We have 29.2 medical practitioners. That's dental assistants, hygienists, dentists, LPNs, medical assistants, and registered nurses. And on the right, you can see some of the costs that just go with running a school-based health system. You have an electronic health record system. We have medical supplies. We have to dispose of hazardous waste. So those are kind of some of the costs that are associated with health services and clinics. And we bill insurance for services provided to students where possible. So we do recoup some of those costs. Okay, we go to the next. So our language, speech, and hearing, this is a subset of our special education department. So the org chart you see is the org chart of the entire special education department. But this is the FTEs associated with language, speech, and hearing. These are budgeted FTEs, right? So these are HPS positions. They're in the budget. And if we go to the next slide, you can see that all of these positions are direct service to students. So they're direct providers. And there's just not a lot of non-staff items in this department's budget. You can see mileage reimbursement because these are staff who are going from school to school as they provide services. The next is a department is psychological services. This is our school psychologists. And again, part of the special education department. And again, if we go to the next slide, there is a director of school psychology. Beyond that, all of the positions are school psychologists. And you can see their primary non-staff expenditures, the testing materials that we need for the various assessments that they do. So those are the ones that we classified as direct service to schools. What I will say is there were in the budget, there are two other departments, college and career readiness and teaching and learning, that are what we classify as direct service to schools because that's instructional coaches who are out in schools all day. And it's also our college and career team who are supporting students with college and career planning and readiness. But those are in this presentation, they're rolled up with the Office of Teaching and Learning. And so that's why I didn't break them out. So I can pause there if there's questions on those four departments.
Yeah.
How much does each director make roughly?
It's a good question. I'd have
Like,
to go
is
back
there
and look
like
at
a range for a director level position?
Yeah, I should have had that with me. I mean, it's per the union contract because they're in HPSA.
Gotcha.
I want to say it's in the 120 to 140.
Okay.
I mean, don't quote me on that, but that's
Yeah,
close.
yeah, but that's pretty standard to what the city has on their side too, at least for divisional directors or department heads.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sure.
Mr. Walker?
Thanks, Chair. So Deputy Foster, I'm probably reserving the bulk of any comments till probably sometime to digest this because just a lot. The one thing I was going to ask is, I think you had the one teacher for hearing impaired under that speech and language. Does that imply that all children with the hearing impaired are in one school, or because I guess I had the impression that children with like hearing impairment are kind of spread throughout the district. So I'm not sure how, like, what's that one teacher doing? Does that
Yeah, I
make
think
sense what I'm asking?
I certainly Jen Hoffman could give you an even better answer than I can give you on that. But what I would say is that's a person who is moving between buildings, and it's a person who is responsible for oversight and ensuring that students with hearing impairments are getting what they need, are getting the services they need, getting the assistive technology they need, and that kind of thing.
All right, that's enough for here. You're right. Jen Hoffman can talk about how that actually functions, because I too was kind of questioning like, how does that work? But
Yeah.
all right, it's direct service, but the person's probably floating. All right,
Yes.
that's it for that. Thank you.
All right, so moving into direct support to schools. So these are departments where, they're building and grounds is probably the best example, right? They're keeping our buildings up and running. So they're very school facing. They're not what you think of as administration. So again, this is the summary of the FTE count that was in the FY25 budget presentation across these departments. And we can go ahead and just dive into the departments. So teaching and learning is certainly one of our largest departments because it covers a lot of different areas. And so again, you see the org chart. And I mentioned in my, in the previous section, we really have 3 cost centers in our budget that I'm rolling up into this one slide. So that is what's historically has been called teaching and learning, which has been instructional coaches. That's had its own cost center. The Office of Academics, which is curriculum directors and specialists, right? The folks who are making decisions about curriculum and leading professional learning on curriculum. And then also the college and career department, which is, as the name implies, they're overseeing counseling, but they're also overseeing all the work around college and career readiness that goes on in the district, as well actually as alternative education. So what you see here is the org chart of the Office of Teaching and Learning. And you can see the FTEs on the right. You can see this is an area where we made significant investments in instructional coaching with the benefit of ESSER dollars. That's why you see such a large number in the 23-24. That was also the area where we had some of the most significant reductions going into 24-25 because those were significant investments with us ESSER. You may notice the 38 to 52 from 15 to 16. And the other thing I want to highlight is there's been movement over the years in terms of what positions live in what part of the budget. And so one of the things you'll notice when we get to the Office of School Leadership later in the presentation, that department has gone from 20 to 8 over the period that this one's gone from 38 to 52. And that's just a function of some positions that used to live in what was then called the Office of School Improvement have moved over and now live in the Office of Teaching and Learning. So on the next slide, and again, this is the department that is responsible for all curriculum. And we don't require schools to purchase consumables. And so when I say consumables, right, when you have curriculum, you may have workbooks, right? So imagine an elementary math classroom where you have workbooks, right? Those have to be purchased every year because each student needs their own workbook at the start of the year. Those purchases are not made at the school level. Those are made at the district level through the Office of Teaching and Learning. So some of these larger dollar figures you see on the right are a reflection of the purchase of curriculum, purchase of consumables and materials to go with the curriculum. And that does have to happen every year. And then you see the staffing on the left side. So you can see that college career readiness team I mentioned is 4 people. You see curriculum directors and specialists, curriculum assistant directors, and then you do see our instructional coaches. So that really is the Office of Teaching and Learning and the departments and the costs. You can see some other costs, the team mentor stipends. So mentors for new teachers. Teachers who are doing that work are paid a stipend, and that comes out of the Office of Teaching and Learning budget as well. So on the next slide, we have building and grounds. So you can see the org chart for building and grounds here. We can go ahead to the next slide. The building and grounds is one of the departments that has one of the larger amounts of non-staff expenditures. And that's for reasons I think that would make sense, right? We have HVAC repairs that have to happen, structural repairs, locks, doors, roofs, windows. We have athletic field maintenance, pest control, monitoring the alarms, right? All of our buildings have alarms. So the live monitoring of our alarm systems, all of those expenses live in the building and grounds budget, including you see a custodial overtime, custodial supplies, right? So all of the cleaning supplies that custodians are using out in our buildings. On the left, you see the FTEs. A couple things I'll highlight here. You know, we've heard conversations about staffing levels, and certainly custodians are an area where we would love to have more custodians if we had the budget to do it. But what you see here is we have 181 custodians and 3 supervisors. So from a management to custodian, right, that's actually a tough ratio from the standpoint of supervision, that we have 3 people responsible for supervising 181 custodians. You all see our trades and the other staff. So we have plumbers, electricians, HVAC, mechanics, mechanical journeymen. So we attempt to have some trade staff to minimize the amount of times we have to go out, but obviously there's certain projects and certain work that we have to go out and contract for. Okay. So I didn't put the whole title. This is Strategic Partnerships and Fund Development, previously known as the Office of Family and Community Partnerships. You can see the org chart. So the org chart has more than what you see on this slide because the Executive Director of Strategic Partnerships also oversees the Welcome Center. So the right-hand side of that org chart is the Welcome Center, which has its own budget line and cost center. So in the actual Office of Strategic Partnerships and Fund Development, you see 4 FTEs. If we go to the next slide, we do have one large ticket item here. So the full service community school partnerships, where we have partners who are in our schools running programming for our students. You have voted for those contracts, so I think you're familiar with those. That budget lives within this department, and that's the 1.5 million you see there. We also, I'll just highlight the translation services. So the budget line item for all language line translation services lives within this budget as well. That's the 140,000 you see there. Print shop. So we have a print shop that produces materials that schools request. This, as you can see, has been very consistent over the years as a 3-person shop that's located over at Buckley, is where the print shop is located. If we go to the next slide, you can see it's a pretty lean budget, not a lot on printing supplies. The copier lease, that's inclusive of the industrial copiers they have at the print shop, as well as the copier leases for the central office. And you can see the 3 positions there. Safety and security. So you see here the org chart for safety and security. You do see the positions there. And if we go to the next slide, I'll highlight one thing, which is if you see the salary budget in the lower left corner of this slide, that looks large for 8 positions, but actually you may recall that in the FY 24-25 budget, we made a change where we implemented 8 floating SSOs to really try to have more flexibility with staffing. So we had some reductions in SSOs, but we wanted the security department to be able to deploy in response to need in schools. And so those 8 floating SSOs, they're budgeted within the safety and security budget. So that salary budget is actually the 8 people who lead the Office of Safety and Security and the 8 floating SSOs. And then you can see the equipment costs on the right. We have radios, we have software for our visitor management, the Raptor system that's in place in all of our schools, incident reporting. The Clear database is how we do background checks. And so you see there's software there. We also have a line item for substitutes and overtime for SSOs. And then Office of School Leadership. So this is the department I talked about earlier, where some of the positions that used to live in what was then called the Office of School Improvement have moved over to teaching and learning. So you do see an overall reduction over time in the staffing in this department. This is where supervision of schools takes place. So this is where our executive directors of school leadership are. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see there are 4 executive directors of school leadership. They each have a portfolio of 8 to 10 schools that they supervise. And then also all of our attendance work and student engagement work is led out of this office. So that's why you see an assistant principal on special assignment and a Safe Schools Climate Coordinator. Okay, we can move to the next one. I apologize for how long this is. And there's just many departments, and so I know it's a lot. So this is now the core of our special ed department. We saw language, speech, and hearing before. We saw psychological services before. This is kind of the rest of our special education and student support department. The note in the lower right, where you see those arrows, this is one of those spaces where in the budget, multi-tiered systems of support and where you see executive director of post-secondary success, that's that college and career department I talked about. In the budget, those were still living in the Office of Teaching and Learning, but they're now moved and they roll up to Assistant Superintendent Hoffman. And so in this org chart, you can see that they now report to Superintendent Hoffman, Assistant Superintendent Hoffman. But in the FTE counts and in the budget, they showed up in the Office of Teaching and Learning. So you see the FTEs there. This again, like teaching and learning, is one of our larger departments. If you go to the next slide, I really organize the FTEs here by function. So we have special education directors who are responsible for overseeing a portfolio of schools. We also have our out of district team, which are the ones who are attending PPT meetings out of district. We have a team that's doing the billing for services. We have a director for specialized programs. That's our substantially separate programs. Compliance is critical within special education. We also have our team that's focused on social and behavioral support and the other teams that you see here. And then again, some of the, we have some part-time pay for teachers and paraeducators are significant costs within the budget, as well as contract services when we need to provide additional services. Transportation is a very small department. Obviously, we contract out. Autumn is our transportation provider. So what this team, and we can go ahead to the next slide, but what this team is largely doing is they're doing the planning and the routing. So they're doing all of the routing of students and then communicating that to Autumn, as well as managing the overall contract with the vendor. Obviously, they have a very large non-staff expenditure, which is the transportation contract to pay for all the services. And I think we have one more in this section, which is the Welcome Center. And so you see here the staffing of the Welcome Center, which is really our district ombudsperson, right? That's the first point of contact for families who have a concern. And if we go to the next slide, this is also, by the way, where our homeless support lives. So our McKinney-Vento programming for homeless students. And you see there on the right, we have a grant where we're providing school supplies, uniforms for students who are homeless through grant funding. We also have a uniform closet for folks who are coming in when they enroll. And I think that is the end of that section. So I'll pause there and see if there are questions on that section.
Questions? All right, keep on going.
All right. Hopefully I've not bored you so much that is. So we're going to move into administration. So this is really what I think in the public, and generally are thinking of when you think of central office, this is what you're thinking of, right? You're thinking of finance and HR and operations. And so we'll move into these now. So the first department we have here is actually the, well, again, here's your summary of all the departments, but we'll go ahead and Board of Education is the first, which is, as you know, we have one staff member. Thank you, Christina, who is supporting the Board of Education. Oop. Yeah, there we go. So we're showing you the overall org chart in this one, obviously, and you can see that the staffing of the Board of Ed has been consistent over the years. If we go to the next slide, again, there's very little in the way of non-staff expenditures here. There are some costs, obviously, associated with our live streaming and the work we do to make sure our board meeting content gets out there in the world. And there's dues we pay for things like CABE. So, there's some costs in there, but it's not huge. If we go to the next slide, this is our communications department. You can see this has gotten smaller over the years. If you look at the org chart, what you'll see though is our director of communications also oversees the print shop, which is why you see the print shop on the right-hand side of this org chart. If you go to the next slide, I've tried to give you some detail on the 3 roles that exist within communications. And so, as you know, we're currently looking to hire the director, and we've made a shift in that role where that role will take on significant responsibility for external relations and advocacy and working with our lobbyists. So that'll be a big part of that director's role. In terms of non-staff expenditures, the costs for our software ParentSquare and the cost for Aptigee, which are 2 of our core applications. One is our district and school websites. One is obviously our mass communication system. And then the other, as I mentioned, that in the Office of Strategic Partnerships, we had our language line contract. And then in the Office of Communications, we have our document translation contract. So this is where we need to get documents into multiple languages. This is where in the budget that lives. Okay. Enrollment and choice. So this is really our family's first point of contact with the Hartford Public Schools when they come in to enroll their child. So you can see the staffing there. You can also see the org chart, and there are really sort of 2 halves of this department, right? So it's enrollment and school choice. And so on the org chart, the left-hand side is really about our interface with Magnet and Resco and all the work that goes on with the lottery. The right-hand side, where you see program manager, recruitment and placement specialists, that is a function that is really the enrollment center where families come in, they register for school. You can see the largest non-staff expense within this is actually the $150,000 for marketing. That's a dedicated grant. So we get a dedicated grant from the state for marketing of our Magnet programming, which can't be used for anything else. And has been $150,000 for the last couple of years. And so that's the billboards you see or the radio spots you hear marketing our Magnet schools. Okay, if we go to the next, this is the Office of Finance. You can see the org chart. You can also see the FTE count. So again, I mean, I know we've talked about this, but you can see that there's been some changes and reductions in staffing within finance over the years. If we go to the next slide, again, there's not a lot of non-staff expenditure within finance. We have the annual audit fee. We pay a share of that. The city pays a share of that. We have some funding for part-time support in payroll and in purchasing. Budgeting software. Also, we have student activity fund software that supports the student activity fund accounting that happens at the school level. And then you can see the team. So the larger teams in finance really are accountants. We have 2 kind of dedicated accountants, and then we have 1 accountant who's entirely focused on tuition and processing all of our payments for tuition. We have a budget and grants team, and then we have our purchasing and accounts payable team. I'm sorry, and our payroll team. So those are sort of the larger teams within the finance operation. So the next slide is legal and labor relations. And so you can see, and again, this is one of those org charts that combines 2 things. So our executive director of internal investigations and security, that's Attorney Wilson. He also has oversight of our safety and security operations. So safety and security rolls up to him. The reason I have asterisks here for the FTEs is until this year, legal and labor relations was a subset of the Office of Talent Management. And so when we get to the Office of Talent Management slide, the numbers on that in every year are inclusive of legal and labor and talent. So they are apples to apples comparisons on that slide. So I'm showing that there are the 7 FTEs in legal and labor relations. I'm double counting those 7. So they're going to show up again in the Office of Talent Management slide in a minute. We go to our next slide. The primary non-staff expenditures within legal and labor relations are a number of software products that we live within legal and labor relations, so time and attendance, our safe schools reporting, Laserfish, which we're using for investigations. But we also have budget lines for a reserve for legal judgments, as well as attorney fees. Those are larger items that live within this budget. And talent management. So again, these numbers are inclusive of legal and labor relations. And so you have the org chart. There really are, if we go to the next slide, there really are 3 teams within talent management. There is a recruitment team, which is 2 people. That was 4 last year with the benefit of ESSER funding, and that's been reduced to 2. We have a data and benefits team, and then we have the hiring team, which is the largest team and responsible for all of hiring, processing, and onboarding work. And again, for non-staff expenditures, I think you recently approved the Relay Graduate School of Education contract. There's other software and licensing, so we our arrangements with LinkedIn or with Indeed, as well as Nimble and our recruiting and hiring software. So that's primarily what you see within talent management. And then operations. So on the org chart here, what you see is the Chief Operating Officer, Chief Davis Googe, is overseeing a bunch of departments we've already talked about. So building and grounds, transportation, enrollment, and choice. But actually, the operations office is pretty small at 6 people. The reason it's grown is with the pandemic, we went to one-to-one computing for students. And MHAS is supporting our IT needs for the most part. What they don't have the bandwidth or capacity for is supporting the educational technology needs that are unique to the school system. And so what you see in that 6 number, and if we can go to the next slide, but what you see is you have a Chief Operating Officer and administrative support. That's the Office of Operations. Then we have a 4-person educational technology team, which is essentially a supplement to the support we have from MHAS in supporting the one-to-one technology. And you can see also that the non-staff costs are really primarily around the technology as well. All right, we're almost there. So performance and accountability, this is our data team. Again, as you've seen with most of these, right? Used to be 12, it's now 5. And so that's, I think you will see that's a pretty consistent pattern across most departments. And really, if you go to the next slide, there are 2 core functions within performance and accountability. So there is a 2-person team, which is really the enterprise systems team. They're managing PowerSchool, as well as the integration of all other applications with PowerSchool. So all of the instructional software we use has to get rostered from PowerSchool. And so all of the work around moving data between PowerSchool and other systems lives with that enterprise systems team. The analysis team is then responsible for basically all the data analysis. So all the slides you see with various data that's coming through this team, as well as all of our compliance. So all of our state reporting relative to students and staff, that's all coming through this team as well. The big contract here is PowerSchool, which is, in that number is inclusive of the core student information system, as well as all of the other modules that we have, including Naviance, which is really our college access software, but that's owned by PowerSchool, so that's all part of the same contract. And last but not least is the Office of the Superintendent and myself. So one note on this, just from a budgetary standpoint, Deputy Superintendent Connie Ratley, the budget for her is in the Office of Teaching and Learning. So that's why on this one, even though you see on the org chart, Deputy Superintendent of Schools and Academic Excellence and Deputy Superintendent of Administration and Operations, this really is reflective of the Superintendent's office and myself. And Connie Ratley is reflected in the earlier slide we saw of the Office of Teaching and Learning. So you can see the count. Sorry, the one thing I'll say on that, the 1920 is a sort of a weird looking year. That's because it would appear that in 1920, when we look at the org chart, the Office of Legal and Labor Relations reported to the Deputy Superintendent. So there's sort of a weird anomaly that year in terms of what this office looks like for staffing. Okay, and then you can see here what are the positions, and again, there's not a lot. It's a lot like the Board of Education budget. There's some organization and dues, there's some travel, but it's not a lot within this budget. There's not a lot of non-salary within this budget. So that, I think, is the very last slide at the end of the administration section.
Ms. Brody.
Thank you. The slide before the last slide of the last section, did we mention, let me see. Where does our attorneys fit on this? Because we do have an attorney, correct?
Yeah, if we go back, I think, Christina, if you go back, I want to say 7 or 8 slides. Yeah, right there. So yeah, so Attorney Wilson oversees the legal and labor relations team, so that's where he lives in the budget.
Who does he report to?
He reports to me.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yep. Christine, actually, if you want to go to the Board of Ed slide that has the org chart for the whole organization, that might be useful. It's like way back. Or I guess, no, sorry, it's at the start of the administration section. Yeah, one more, I think. So just to the extent it's helpful, this is where the two divisions are, so you can see kind of what lives under each division.
Mr. Walker?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So if that's Ed Wilson, then where is Lori sitting here, or is Lori not under us and working with the city? Help me understand that.
Yeah, she's an employee of the city in the Corporation Counsel's office.
Okay.
So she's not part of our org chart, and I probably should know how that is funded, but honestly, that's something I'll have to get back to you on if that's a transfer back to the city.
Funnily
Yeah.
enough, what we do, there's an entire report that I had to do for years, in which is just called an in-kind service. So she's just paid normally. And then
Oh,
the
and so we're
city,
not
like,
reimbursing for that service.
no. The city
Yeah.
just washes it out of the goodwill of their hearts.
We appreciate
Doesn't
it.
want to give more money, but hey, in-kind services.
So I think would be helpful to see this is the cost element. So this is appropriate for here. This is just a broader question as action. From an org standpoint, it'd be good to have some way of seeing the dot line folks who are part of the team. Laurie would be that. I think the MHIS folks are kind of dot line. That's all. Just as in action, just to understand it, right? And if the cost is like kind, that's fine. But it just seems bizarre. We're talking about this. We see Laurie all the time, and not to see her on here is like, oh, wait a minute. She has to be somewhere.
No,
So
that's a fair point.
just a comment. Yeah.
Yeah, we could probably
Okay.
figure out a way to add an MHS. Just to be clear, MHS is not in kind, so we 100% pay for that.
Okay. So just to kind of to see some of that, just from an org standpoint, would be just helpful.
Yeah.
But this is good. So that's the comment I had now, and I'll have to do more reviewing to see to have other feedback.
Any other questions? Deputy Foster, this was so much information, so overwhelming, but so great. It'll be, I think, really helpful as we talk about the 2026 budget to refer back to these slides. So thank you for sharing these with us and for your great presentation. I think I'll go to Mr. Walker. Mr. Walker.
Yeah, can I just, since we're pushing off early on this one, one quick question. You kind of got to it and talking about the Connie Ratley thing about where they're located. Now, beyond that, you also had like a deputy superintendent for teaching and learning that I'm thinking is not Connie Ratley.
Yeah.
So is there a Connie Ratley and then still a deputy superintendent for teaching and learning? It'd be nice to see kind of how the organization, how they fit together in some way, because you had two deputy directors like that. Well,
I can speak to it. So that was really, it's a weird anomaly in the budget, because Deputy Superintendent Ratley, from a budgetary standpoint, is in the teaching and learning budget. But if you look at the org chart that's on the screen, so Deputy Superintendent Ratley is the Division of Schools and Academic Excellence. So that big box underneath the superintendent, there is an assistant superintendent of teaching and learning who is overseeing the leftmost column under Connie. So you see where it says elementary, secondary, CTE. So that's really why it looked like there were two. It's really a function of, whereas really there's somebody who's leading teaching and learning. Assistant Superintendent Hoffman is leading student services. Janelle Hooker is leading strategic partnerships and fund development, and then Corinne Barney is leading school leadership. So there are sort of 4 people reporting to Dr. Ratley, but it just so happens that Dr. Ratley and one of those people live in the same cost center from a budget standpoint.
So then I'll just ask that one extra action. That's where I was asking for me to have that kind of organizational flow, just like you're saying. So I can see the face or the name that, at that level, because I see these people and I kind of want to know where they fit. And your explanation was good. I know you don't want to show it from here because this is more of a cost thing, but just a request if there is kind of a, just a high level org thing that kind of shows those kind of key players and how they fit into the universe. That would be nice to have as a reference.
Understood.
Yeah, just a request. All right, that's it.
Chair Hockenhall, is it okay if I ask a question?
Of course.
It would be helpful for me. I know we've talked about trying to do more of these kind of like deep dives in this context. It would help me to know if, did I get it right? And what I mean, I would welcome feedback, right? Is this the right level of detail? Too much, too little, in the wrong direction?
I think you can safely assume there's no too much detail, considering how new we all are. So, yeah, the level of detail is good.
My comment, if I may, sir, I can see everyone. So may I speak now, or do I have people have their hands raised?
Nope, you're good. Go ahead.
Okay. I would appreciate one of these presentations with like a special focus on areas where we feel like we need advocacy, right? Like for instance, the tuition funding, like offering more information so we better understand. What I'm hoping to do, certainly starting with the next legislative session, is more advocacy for more funding and also improving the system that we work in and we're funded through. So if we can get more on the budget, but also what areas are challenging for us, and there are areas maybe within our control, but also outside of our control. So the data, but also with sort of your more context in your take on it. So we sort of know how to interpret some of the information. That to me would be helpful.
So if you, oh, I'm sorry, Chair, if I can, this is more the answering his question kind of thing, or just responding to his question. The detail is not too much. 'Cause you got to talk about it at some point. I would like to see beyond this moment, because this is again great for head count and that kind of thing, is to then go back and talk about again at a kind of a chunk level, like what are the basic duties of these areas? Like if I have somebody who's teaching and learning, what are their basic duties? What are they actually trying to accomplish? And kind of piggyback off Ruth saying that at some point we have to break this down a little bit to get to some areas so you can understand who covers which duties, key functions, and things like that. So there's a better sense of what gets accomplished where within the organization. I realize you just couldn't put it all here because it'd just be overload. So I think this is appropriate for this discussion. That's just, if we have future discussions, that'll be it. The other question I had was based on that slide. If we can go back to the slide that we had. And apologies for that. I had a discussion with somebody who's a coach who had the question of how that duty gets covered. Like we had a significant shrinkage of coaches. And so again, this is a question going back maybe to the folks in that area, not so much you, Deputy Foster, but one of her roles is that we were training a lot of coaches because they were going to help our teachers to become proficient in all this new curriculum we rolled out, in programs like Wit and Wisdom and things like that. These coaches were going to be resources to help our teachers get better at these new tools and curriculums and things. And with you cutting them so much, I'm left feeling like, well, how is that being accomplished? Is there a different strategy for how we're going to help teachers get proficient if we, shrunk the coaches by a significant amount? They were to have a purpose. So, you may not be able to answer that, but it just would be, that's the kind of thing I'd be interested in as a board member, because these are part of our strategic kind of tactics, right? And now it's been changed, and I didn't have any answers to how we're going to do it, but it was just a concern expressed.
Yeah, I mean, I will certainly bring that back to Dr. Radley, because I mean, she is going to be able to speak much more eloquently than me. Certainly,
Mhm.
there is a plan within the Office of Teaching and Learning about how to deploy our coaches differently based on the reduction in numbers. I mean, it's much like the custodial conversation. If we could still have the same number of coaches we had last year, that would be better. But we don't have the ability to have the same number of coaches or the same number of custodians or the same number of many other things that we had last year. But there is a plan within the Office of Teaching and Learning. And certainly part of that is we have to be strategic in deploying our coaches, right? And whether, there may be places that have higher level of need where, they're getting more time with a coach than a place with a lower level of need. But so Dr. Radley can certainly, like I said, speak more eloquently to what
Right.
that plan is with the reduced number. But certainly, I don't think you're going to find anybody who thinks, we're better with less than we would be with more.
Sure. So understand my point, and I'm glad that, yeah, it sounds like Chief or Deputy Superintendent Bradley should speak to that. So I'm just giving it just as a request. Is I also want to understand a little bit more where our risk is, and then kind of what our mitigation plans are, because this is clearly not our deal. It's not ideal, but it's just the reality of life. Same thing with, since you brought up the custodian, I didn't want to dive into that, but I remember a teacher or two talking about, I mean, worse facilities management, right? Because supposedly fewer custodians were in her building. And it'd be good again to understand what our mitigation plans are. It may well be that, hey, we're just going to have a few less dumpings of garbage per week, and so we all just got to pitch in a little bit more. But to understand that, and you get to my point, just to understand what the plan is, and then this is what we communicate to people.
Yeah.
Yep, that's kind of it. Yep, thank you.
I have another question. I suppose through you, Madam Chair, as is Robert's rules appropriate and such. The athletics. If I wanted just a better breakdown of how that department works in general, like, can you just explain that a little bit more? Maybe I wasn't paying attention, but like the way in which the city or the BoE does athletics, you have your director, you have your assistant support staff, and then we like manage it out through all the different schools, right?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So for both middle school and high school sports, right, there's a set of costs, and they're pretty similar, right? I mean, you have transportation to get back and forth to games. You have the salary that we pay the coaches. You have the money we pay to game officials, the referees.
Mhm.
You have uniforms, and you have equipment. Those are sort of the five big buckets. There's some other things around the edges, right? Like the final form software and things like that. Those are the big buckets of expense. And in the way we budget it is every high school gets an athletic allocation,
Mhm.
which is covering all of those things for the year. It varies by school, right? If a school has a football team, obviously their athletic allocation is larger than if they don't have a football team.
Right.
And every high school also has an athletic director, which is it's generally a teacher
Mhm.
who's getting paid a stipend to serve as the athletic director for the school.
And
so
then
at
all
the high
that comes
school,
from that school's individual budget.
no, it's also allocated separate. Like we give each of the high schools an allocation over and above the other funding they're getting for purposes
Gotcha,
of covering athletics. So they don't have to cover that. We provide that to them.
Okay.
And so at the high school level, the high school athletic director is taking on a lot of the responsibility for, scheduling,
Right. Organization
arranging
of
for autumn transportation to get kids to a game, that kind of stuff. Middle school, we don't push that money out to the schools. At middle school, all of that money for all those things I described just
Mhm.
lives in the athletic department budget. And we don't pay for a separate athletic director at each middle school either. So really all of that, like scheduling a referee, booking the
Mhm.
transportation, all of those activities that a high school athletic director is doing for their high school, the district athletic department is doing for all the middle school sports.
Gotcha. And then, okay, so that's helpful. I'll let you know if I have more questions eventually. If I wanted more questions about how that, or like how each of these divisions worked, is that a you question? Is that a someone else question?
I think you could start with me, and then I
Okay.
can always either get you the answers, or we can figure out a time or a way for you to
Cool.
engage with somebody else. But I think you can start with me.
Excellent. And then my next question is like media services and libraries. Are those all contained within individual school budgets, or would there be a part that's in central office?
It's within the school budgets.
Gotcha. Okay.
I mean, there's oversight from the Office of Teaching and Learning, but it's the budget for that's in each school's budget.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. That's helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions? Deputy
Actually,
Foster?
one more question. So if I decided that I personally wanted to make it so that media centers and libraries got more funding in each of the schools, who do we talk to about that? Like, I recognize that, there is a large list of things that we would probably like to do more of. So that's not a statement on our priorities or anything. But if I wanted to make that to my thing on the Board of Education, who do I bother about that? Is that a you still? Do I still just bother you?
Well, I mean, you can certainly talk to me about it, but I would think as we get into the FY26 budget process, I think it's a conversation for this board, right?
Okay.
Because the first question I'm going to have, I might say, that sounds great. What do you want us to not do so we
Right.
can afford it?
Yeah. I understand. Okay, cool. So that's more of a overtime, keep talking more people, figure it out type of thing. Excellent. All right, now I am done asking questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I was just looking in the budget book and there is like a separate line, Mr. Mills, for text and library books. That's probably where you want to look for like kind of individuals where folks are right now. I love the budget book, by the way. I think I look at it several times a week, so thank you. It is used, it is reviewed.
Of course you love the budget book.
I do. It's not nearly as large as the city budget book, but it is very informative, so thank you. So thank you again. I think this is extremely helpful again as we head into the budget discussions here in the next 2 months or so. So really do appreciate it. And board members, if you do have specific questions, please feel free to reach out to Deputy Foster on those directly. Deputy Foster, anything else from your side of things? Okay. Awesome. So the last thing that I just wanted to wrap up this meeting with, because it is quite apt after the week we just had, and then, heading into the budget discussion, I don't know who the collective we is. I have been talking to other folks, and collectively, I think it is time to bring back the called the Legislative Advocacy Task Force. For which I hope that any and all board members that wish to join the task force will join in on. We're still trying to finalize who exactly will be on this task force. Obviously, I wasn't around the last time we had it, but in an age where we, may or may not have issues with federal funding and we need more help from our state partners and local partners, I think there is no time like the present to bring this back. We will have our lobbyists, I believe, as part of it, administration and those folks, and then likely union leaders and other folks within the community. So more to come on that, but I just wanted to get that out there publicly that is definitely something that we are looking to bring back sooner rather than later. So stay tuned. With that, if there is nothing else from the group, thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you to fellow board members for your great questions. Thank you, Deputy Foster, for all this great information. I'm definitely overloaded, but I'm very appreciative of all of it. Thank you, Ms. Santiago, for supporting us today, and thank you to all the viewing public who joined us this evening. And we look forward to seeing you at our next meeting in the near future.